Yeah. I'm probably gonna get some feedback on that one.
Maybe a little bit, just a little.
Your company is based in Illinois, isn't it? Chicago?
It is, but we got a good crew in Detroit, and it's growing. So we'll probably end up, hopefully have some sort of physical presence here as well. But we're in the downtown Chicago, Illinois.
Sweet. All right, I got the live stream working, so I'm gonna ping that, and then I'm gonna stop eating my lunch. Sorry, everybody. Thanks for being patient. And we will get started. I'm just about to share my screen. So you gotta do all this marketing production, so. It's good. We're always having fun. Thanks for everyone being patient for us on getting this kicked off.
Have you used every single skateboard behind you? It's like, is there each one has like a story in your life or some kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, the story of the skateboards behind me are like, I went through midlife crisis like 6 months ago because I had nothing else to do due to COVID and being stuck at home. so I dropped like a ton of money just buying all my favorite skateboards. That's the truth, Ben.
I've seen your videos, your Blumira skateboarding themed videos.
Yeah, personally, I do skateboard. I've had a collection for a long time, but not as to the extent I have now. And I have a personal office space from home, and my wife is like, get rid of these skateboards. So I started to bring them here because there was just too many, right? So, all right, cool. We're gonna get started. Ben, thanks for joining. Ben, you're a CISO at Entara, been a CISO at many different organizations, worked with many different customers, security products, tools, and appreciate you joining us to talk a little bit about your experiences with incident response as we get into how to help improve organizations' security postures based on some of your different experiences. So I've been looking forward. We've been talking about having you on for a while.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about what you've seen from your experiences with different customers. So I think first off, we get started, curious, anything you want to add about yourself too, besides what I said?
No, started very technical background, was able to make transition more to the business side. Definitely in the last few years. So started in the weeds, which is, I think, always the best place to start when doing this kind of thing.
Cool. So well, first I got to answer Bill or William's question is, do my skateboards have names? I haven't officially started naming them, but a lot of them have like different skaters on the boards. But I digress. So on the incident response side, right, help me understand, like a lot of people don't really realize in the security space, like incident response is a certain function. It means a few different things. Can you walk us through what it means to you when someone says incident response?
Yeah, for us, incident response means responding usually to a major incident, a forensic post-breach incident, meaning the customer already knows they're compromised. They engage their counsel, they engage their insurance carrier, and they usually call an IR firm and a recovery remediation firm, or CIR firm, to assist. So in our context, it's really post-breach incident response, figuring out what happened and bring the business back online.
And is there a difference between that and pre-breach incident response?
Well, not all incidents lead to breaches. We'll put it like that. So think about all the alerts you get, all the different things, like let's say Blumira might alert on. They could be considered an incident, but it doesn't mean there's a full-fledged breach. And you have a lot of stakeholders, including your leadership involved, and there's PR and those kind of issues. So we usually come in like after or during when everything is on fire. And it's usually it's a major incident.
And what is that, from an organization perspective, like what types of organizations and sizes are you typically working with? Is there any type of profile that's typical?
Oh, it ranges like crazy, actually. So we've had engagements with companies that had offices in about 37 countries, 9,000 employees. We've had engagement companies that have 400, 100 employees. It's so dependent. It's also a lot of times dependent on how sophisticated their security apparatus is internally. The larger and maybe less put together or less sophisticated, we get a lot of exposure to because they're usually breached, to be frank. But it ranges. I'd say most companies we average are at least minimum of 1,000 employees, but we still get smaller shops that need help. So
How do most organizations first discover they maybe had a breach or incident?
So, unfortunately, the most common type of breach that occurs, and also the most profitable, ignoring the current SolarWinds and thing that happened, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, is ransomware. And a lot of people, when they hear ransomware, they think like WannaCry and those things from a couple of years ago. Ransomware now is not exactly what it used to be, even a year ago, I would say. And not to be an alarmist, but it's a lot more sophisticated, and it goes well beyond Windows at this point, as far as how pervasive it is and the things that do. It's really more of a hands-on engagement, and it's very successful in the United States because they almost always get paid in some shape or form.
Oh, interesting. So you're saying because people have money, they're more likely to just pay the ransom to get their data back or access to the
especially in the US. So like there are other countries where they've actually made it illegal to pay ransomwares. And you face potential litigation from some of the governing body if you do. But in the United States, they're talking about doing that. I think there's some talks in the FTC or FCC where potentially companies could get fined for paying ransomwares. But when you go to an executive team and you tell them pay $1 million or you lose $10 million from a production line being down in a month, it's usually they don't like paying it, but a lot of them choose to.
Yeah, Chase has a question, which I think is great. Are there any specific industries that are more likely to pay a ransom than others?
Usually it's the more vulnerable industries that get in that situation. So a large manufacturing is usually a top one. Some
and are you saying that because like
hospitals
it stops the production line essentially?
Yeah,
might have an impact on.
Exactly. And also a lot of it's actually dependent, and this is kind of what I'm going to try to tell everybody and get them to go on board for what I'm saying. It's really dependent, surprisingly, on some of the things, very easy things you could do before a breach happens that decide where you're paying a ransomware or not.
And what do those things equate to that people should be doing that make that determination of whether they're going to have to pay or not?
So for those who have, some have significant familiarity, passing familiarity with ransomware, one of the main things we see now is, I said it's not just contained to Windows. We see attackers logging into SAN arrays, Dell EMC SAN arrays, Nutanix, logging into VMware, vCenter, logging into backup appliances like data domains, maybe exagrids, like all these that your IT team, your backup team knows about. Deleting the backups, changing the password to access these arrays. If you have a SAN array, you have snapshots, so delete all the snapshots and make them inaccessible. So what we're seeing now is where in the past, ransomware it's still automated, but it was more automated and usually you had backups to go off. The attackers are going after backups and they're actually writing the malware to target like basically Gartner. If you're on the Gartner board, they're writing malware for it basically. So
you're saying don't buy products off the Gartner Magic Quadrant?
No, I'm not. Well, I'm not a fan of Gartner. Like you could ask, don't repeat that, or I guess it's recorded. Right. But basically, if you're on Gartner, they might eBay like an old data domain or might eBay like an old backup appliance of some sort, and they'll write malware to target it. And that's the biggest problem. I'll give you an example that we ran into. We had an entire, it was like 500 VMs encrypted on guest, meaning the Windows OS had the encryption. The attacker then logged into VMware, went to what's called the data store where all those virtual machines exist, all those servers, and they encrypted the data store and left a note on the data store. So they did it twice. So it's very difficult to recover from those things, especially if you don't have backups. So we run into a lot. So my suggestion, seriously, take your backups, put them on a completely separate network, separate VLAN, segregate them, put an internal segmentation firewall between the backups and your internal environment, use jump boxes with 2-factor on them to get in, put something, just keep your backups separate. Make it so nothing can talk to your backups, but your backups can talk in to do what they need to do, you know, taking the snapshots and whatever it is. So that's advice number 1. Protect your backups at all costs.
Hey, in some cases, have backups.
or have backups, yes.
I mean, incremental steps, right? But I think both things. Make sure you're backing up.
Yeah, a lot of people treat their SAN snapshots as the backup. It's not. These guys are going in and deleting your snapshots. And you have nothing to recover. It's pretty crazy, to be honest.
It's kind of interesting because I think, like, you know, we used to think of DR of like, you know, planning for the worst case scenario of a flood or this or that. And the reality is like the probability of that stuff actually happening is pretty low. But the probability of an organization getting hit with ransomware is actually pretty high at this point, right?
Unbelievably high. And I'll give you another example. A lot of the attacks we see are from people with corporate devices accessing personal emails. So they don't have the protections. They don't have sandboxing. They have all those things. And they open their Gmail, they download something, and that's usually all it takes, even with EDR sometimes.
Hey, so what are some of the things that besides backups, right, that are common low-hanging fruit to even prevent ransomware from getting in? Because I think, like, you know, backups is certainly a measure once it's on there, right? Being able to restore is something important. But yeah, what are the techniques and tactics people are using to actually get in there, a customer's environment, then to start deploying some of this stuff?
So we could go through it. I would say let's go the second preventative, like post-breach, because this is also important. Then we can go to the pre-breach. The second preventative is welcome back. Is management. Like, take anything that has a management interface on it. So take all your switches. We've had attackers go on the switches and like do things there just to be like, change the passwords. You can recover from them, but like they could say something like, we'll take out all your switches in your environment unless you pay us in this amount of time. That could be a problem. So anything that has a management port that's not Windows, like appliances, everything, also put them in a complete segmented network. Only things that are in the jump boxes can get into it, protected behind kind of that wall. There's no reason for anything in your regular environment to talk to. Now, as far as like internally what people are doing, I guess, to minimize, besides all the typical stuff everybody does, EDR, 2 things, 2 areas you should focus on. One is actually segmentation. Like, I can't tell you how many environments we go into or do some sort of assessment where endpoints, computers, people's workstations can still talk to each other. Either on VPN.
I can tell you. I worked at Cisco.
So a lot.
Yeah.
There's
I think the reality is like network segmentation has not been an easy problem for most organizations to solve, right?
Well,
today.
Come talk to me.
We can talk,
I have some solutions for that. I'm not gonna Mac the products. I'm not. But I'll just say, like, on low, easy hanging fruit, like nothing should talk to your endpoints. Like, they can talk out to things, but nothing should talk to them, meaning they can't talk to each other. This is, in most organizations, just the endpoints is like a 5-minute change. Assuming you don't have like any special proprietary software, you're not running something like a Tenium that uses like peer-to-peer something. There's a very easy to do. A lot of, CISOs at other companies and directors are like, okay, I have EDR, I have privilege access management, I have all these like different solutions, because unfortunately the way we think about security because of the market is, buying more products to try to solve the problem, which is not always the case, is Active Directory, the source of all evil in every single engagement. I've not run into a breach that did not leverage Active Directory in some way in an attack yet.
And what do you typically see on the Active Directory side?
It is maybe the easiest and most convenient way to compromise an environment. It has so many inherent weaknesses and so ubiquitous everywhere And unfortunately, a lot of the knowledge on how to make it better, which I gladly even share my screen and show some stuff if you want, people don't know where to get it. I'd be happy to point anybody on this Zoom how they can improve it. But everything, account enumeration, Kerber roasting, pass the hash, pass the ticket, LLMNR, all these things you might not know what I'm referring to are all readily available in almost all environments that have Active Directory. People don't know about them.
Yep. And so I think what you're referring to, and you can share your screen if you want, if there's stuff you want to suggest. I think everyone loves visuals. Yeah, and I can attest, right? I think the credential aspect in the Active Directory are the largest types of attacks I've seen as well over the years in security, right? It's just the lowest hanging fruit and easiest way to get into an environment and move around quick.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. There's a lot of. I'm here to tell everybody something. You could go to a specialized place and spend a lot of money to do an Active Directory assessment. Some of these range $20,000, $30,000. Or you could watch this webinar and the link I'm about to show you, get a product for completely free, and it'll probably do 80% of all what those assessments do right now with almost no setup. You just click execute and you'll have a full understanding of what's going on in your AD and all the low-hanging fruit. So I try to share this. Actually, I'll share my screen real quick.
Free tools. We love that.
Free tools. Let me pop this thing out of here. One sec. There we go. All right. Can you see my web browser?
Yes, we can see it.
All right. This is a product not a lot of people have heard about. It's free. Like if you downloaded this and run it to your environment, there is no cost. And what it does is it has this sort of like checklist rule system. Checks against so many different things and actually builds relationship structures for you. And it takes all that really complicated like AD knowledge that takes years for some people to build and presents in like a very easily to understand way. So for example, at least one domain controller is not owned correctly. It'll give you the technical explanation. It'll give you the advised solution and how to fix it. And it just kind of repeats over and over. People pay, frankly, insane money to do this. Somebody to just run a report. So save yourself some money. And if you have any concerns about your AD right now, whether it's secure, go to pinkcastle.com, download the product. It's free. I'll put another free one in. There's this really great group called LiftNet. It's I forgot the guy's name. He's a Microsoft MVP, and he makes tools for free designed to protect Active Directory, which is the most common thing. One of those products is called Password Protection by LiftNet. So a lot of people don't realize their domain controllers have this feature that lets them filter bad passwords out. So what this guy did, so he built this product, very easy to install. Have you heard of the website, Have I Been Pwned? I assume most people have.
Yep.
I've Been Pwned has a great list of every common passwords been compromised. Think of like the top 10,000. So what this product does is it downloads the hashes, all those passwords, and it prevents your users from picking them. So if you have users picking summer 2020, or like all these like really common passwords, this will just straight up block it from happening. So not only do you have good complexity, you're blocking commonly used passwords that do meet complexity.
Sweet.
So enough. I think that's probably enough tool.
That means I can't use capital C COVID-19 2020.
Somebody's using that password, right?
Oh, I know. Yeah, it's not me. Yeah, I mean, I always make those fun observations. I think I finally got my wife to change her passcode on her phone from 123456 just recently.
That's not. I don't know if that's good or bad.
Yeah. Well, it's good that she changed it, right? And I think the reality is like, well, hey, at least that's not the password for other things. It's just a phone. But
she's Android or iPhone?
iPhone. Yeah.
Nice. What do you think about Face ID?
we like Face ID, I use it, she uses it. I just upgraded from a 7, so I didn't have Face ID, I had Touch ID. Yeah, and it's, it's practical, usable. And then I think the other thing is like, hey, don't give the kids your passcode, because I think kids are the greatest threat to most people working from home or have their own devices. And I think I like this goes back to, something just this week, actually, I posted about on LinkedIn as well, but like, yeah, they love to install things like extensions and video games that just love to have malware in them.
Yeah.
Is some of the reality there, and that's some of the different vectors that become much more real when everyone's living in a world at home, and using the same devices, right?
Agree with you 100%. Yep.
Hey, so Ping Castle, this is cool. I haven't seen this tool before, so that's something I think people appreciate. I tend to agree. Like Active Directory, there is a lot in regards to misconfigurations, risk within an environment that it exposes, and generally speaking, I'd say like 90-some% of companies use it somewhere or another. What about beyond Active Directory? Like as you're starting to talk about cloud applications, do you see much of cloud applications involved in the incidences and breaches that you're responding to?
Azure, actually, and especially if they're running the Azure Active Directory sync, like they're syncing the stuff up, it is a gold mine for reconnaissance. In most cases, especially if you don't have MFA. So Azure Active Directory has the same inherent issues as surprisingly as Active Directory, in that all the default configurations are terrible out the box. So I'll give you an example of an attack or an engagement we might do. Let's say we gain access to an Azure AD account. We don't have access to the on-prem environment. We know nothing. You can do a couple things to maintain persistence. Some of it's changed because Microsoft's improved things a little bit, but by default, Azure doesn't like prevent you from inviting guests into Azure. And people don't realize when you invite a guest, they're actually like an account in your forest. And most guest accounts let you connect to Azure via PowerShell, like command line. And you can do all kinds of interesting things. Here's another fun one. By default, a guest can invite another guest. So you have an Azure account for guests, and he can invite like 20 other guests in there. And all kinds of fun stuff can start happening. But one of the things we do see in incidents is they'll gain access to an Office 365 account. And once you have an Office 365 account, by default, you can actually get to the Azure panel and look at it. There's a lot of really great information to look at about an organization, and you can actually dump their entire directory structure like instantaneously. Meaning so they know everybody who works, everybody's account, when's the last time they logged in, what devices they're attached to. That is like super useful.
Their phone number, probably.
Their phone number. So maybe they want to call them. I heard something on your different webinar, calling and asking for the 2-factor, and they give it to you.
Oh yeah.
Or something along those lines. Or they could do something like, hey, this is your IT department, like I heard on one of your other webinars, they know your home address. They know like all this extra information. And that's just default Azure out of the box. It's the way it works.
Yeah, I thought last week I was talking to Megan, pen tester at Networks Group, right? And she was just talking about like, hey, if I just act like I'm IT, she said the one thing that makes a big difference is calling into US, like having a US English voice, right? US English voice definitely increases the probability of success. But like, yeah, being able to share information about that person with them builds immediate trust, and they're willing to pretty much give you passwords, passcodes, allow you to get access to things that you shouldn't have.
We live in a trusting society,
yeah.
Patrick. Good and bad.
No, I agree 100%. And so that I think that's some of the challenges. I at Duo, I think one of the things that is interesting to me, and I think other companies marching towards it, is getting to a point where there's less ability to provide a shared trust, right? Or a shared key. Certainly can help mitigate some of these things. I think not all the applications are ready for it. And people generally are hesitant to change. So that's some of the challenges with that as well. But yeah, do you think technologies like U2F, for instance, actually eliminate a lot of the problems we're talking about?
Yeah, I agree with you. People don't like to get tied to a physical device, though, right? So, and unfortunately, it's not always the best security that wins out.
Nope.
Right.
No, I think that's a reality. I think it's funny. Like a lot of times, it's the people that get in the way. One of the things that I always go back to is like executives requiring us to do bypass features in security products because they don't want that extra step in their workflows, right? And so there's a natural tendency to say, hey, that's an inconvenience to me. Let's do it a certain way.
Let's get rid of it. Yeah.
And unfortunately, it still continues even after people do get breached, right?
Well, I would hope that would be the mother of all lessons, but you're probably right. There's truth to
look
what you're
at Target. I kind of laugh at Target, but it's like, yeah, they're still the only one that's using chip and pin on cards, and it's only with their credit cards. Like, you would have thought the whole industry.
I haven't been at Target in a long time, to be frank, but yes. But the US didn't do it. Europe has had it for years, like years. I remember when it first came out there and it was just everywhere. I tried to use like an American credit card. Like I couldn't get it to work anywhere because everything wanted a chip and pin. Like it wouldn't even let me just swipe. But we caught up eventually.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's some areas making progress in that regard regarding like chip and pin. Sorry, we're going all over the place. So I think hopping in like tactics used to actually get into an environment. We talked a little bit about cloud, and it sounds like Azure being similar. I think another thing is getting access to, and I think you said directory, but information, email being a big one as well. Which is basically getting into accounts and or collecting, forwarding email, for example, and collecting information over time to be able to use for reconnaissance as well, becoming more and more common. But yeah, what's it look like once they get this information? How are they using it and then leveraging to get into a customer's environment so they can actually deploy ransomware?
So if we're doing a more sophisticated type, there's really two scenarios that we run into. The first is called usually like business email compromise. That's where you are communicating with a supplier or another business who you have regular communication with because they're a partner of yours, or it's a friend. So the first one is, okay, I can't, get into Blumira. I want to get to Blumira's partner because it's easier. They have less security. They'll compromise an account. They'll look at the email chain history between, let's say, the two of us. They'll find an email with a referencing like an existing conversation. They'll reply to it and they'll attach a link, or usually it's a link or an attachment. Attachments aren't very as successful as they used to be because a lot of people are doing sandboxing, and even though there are ways to evade it, it's still, not that great. So that's one way. You get an email from somebody it's the reply to an internal email. It's, so you don't think anything of it. The second way we saw, and this is a real life example, like that is recent. The other one's a real life example, but this is something that's kind of recent in my mind. The company with on-prem Exchange had MFA, but they had Active Sync, and Active Sync is a great way to bypass MFA. So when you hook up your phone with your email server, it doesn't ask you for a second factor. That's so because it's a proprietary protocol and whatever. So
use modern authentication.
Yes, use modern authentication. So they get in. So you have MFA. You're like, oh, I got MFA, but they basically use this other protocol to completely bypass it. They get in, and what they do is they look at your email, and if they're targeted, they'll actually do an internal email between two people, like within the company, to try to get a ransomware execution. Or there's so many different ways, but that's actually one we've run into. And it's tough if you're getting an email from a colleague in perfect English. It's not like they're misspelling things with a link or an attachment. And here's the funny thing: most security solutions for email don't do any scanning or anything for internal email. Like usually those products will scan when something from the outside comes in, but if we're just talking to each other, it doesn't do any of that. So that's one we ran into, is interesting and led to a major ransomware spread.
Yeah. I mean, I think often it is the type of misconfigurations or overlooked pieces. And I think that is, I kind of joked about modern authentication, but yeah, we saw
You're
that
right.
at Duo all the time, right? Like you put on Duo on your Exchange server and it's like, all right, I'm all done. But it's like, well, no, Active Sync isn't leveraging that. I think there's a lot of different avenues in email systems that and not only email, firewalls and other places that end up becoming places of bypass to access or risk. I think that, I mean, another common one I see is like RDP exposure on the internet,
Yeah. Yep.
or SMB exposure. I'm pretty shocked, like just being at Blumira, the amount of times we deploy a POC, probably 30 to 40% of the time people have already, Windows hosts accessible via RDP on the internet. And that's, I mean, that's a good example where it's like, well, now you have host compromise basically with a basic available exploit, depending on if it's patched or not and whether two factors.
Yeah, it's usually it's not patched, and it's a Windows 2008 R2, and it's over.
Yep. Yeah, and I think the reality is too that information's become so much more accessible to attackers. You look at the different services. You brought up Census earlier, me being involved there, but there's 20 or 30 different services that give you, hey, who has vulnerable hosts? And so I don't even need to scan your environment for recon in order to know that you're vulnerable and accessible. And I do think a lot of times, like if I'm an attacker, like why would I focus on anything but what the low hanging fruit is that I can just get near immediate access to start trying to deploy things like ransomware.
Yeah, I agree. It's low-hanging fruit is easiest, and there's so much of it. It's not like they're just struggling to find low-hanging fruit to breach. It's everywhere. You can go, like you said, on or Shodan or any of those apps, just run something. You'll find something vulnerable within the context that you're looking.
Do you ever have you spent any time? This is a funny one. My kid asked me this yesterday. I posted a link there, but and some people are more like, yeah, do this all the time and go check out that stuff, and other people are not. So if you don't want to answer this question, but have you spent any time with actual people that are running these attacks, in understanding how they're thinking about them at all?
Like the attackers or like pen testers?
No, more the attacker side, like logic, that sort of stuff, right? And I think a lot of people in the security industry, right, have different connections or know different people, or they spend time under aliases on dark web. Steve Reagan would be
hard position right now.
Yeah, you don't have to. That's what I said. Like,
No.
You don't have to answer. Sorry, and I didn't talk about it beforehand, but I was just curious if you have any perspective on what they're thinking, what their approach is, and their goal.
So the goal is to make money. I have not and don't personally know. I do, like, there are places where you can see kind of the latest tool sets that you can buy online. It's a market, the attackers sell each other. There's people who just their only job is to write exploits, and there are people who just buy them, and it's a real marketplace. Think of it like an eBay for tools. Same way you'd go buy a software tool. There's some attack technique. A lot of it makes it to GitHub, which is nice. And sometimes you have to do a little bit of digging to find it. But as far as the goals, it's at this point, it's just to make money. And the situations where they're stealing intellectual property and that kind of thing, I'm not saying it's rare, but it's a lot easier to just ransomware people.
Yeah,
and they pay you.
I think if you're trying to steal intellectual property, the reality is that's a targeted attack, right?
Yeah, and it has to be valuable to someone, right? Like Blumira's intellectual property isn't valuable to like a bunch of companies, right? They don't care, they don't do the business.
Yep. No, I think that's fair. I think like normally you're starting to talk about nation state there, like other countries trying to get intellectual property, that sort of stuff, which we should probably talk about Solarwinds.
Oh man, it's a mess.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's your experience in the last couple of weeks? I think it's been almost 2 weeks now since the Solarwinds news and FireEye and all that fun stuff. What's your perspective there from what organizations should be thinking about from an impact perspective, and what they might or could do to mitigate against it?
It's still surprisingly too early to say. We know some things that mitigated, like every security product has some of the signatures and stuff to detect like what we know, but the picture's still being built. So like if you go to the CISA, DHS, Homeland Security, actually surprisingly it's very good. They have an emergency directive. You can get all the latest details of what's going on. The latest is they're finding that basically, for those who don't know, SolarWinds is a company that does IT software that monitors your infrastructure and a lot of other things. They make a lot of tools. That's what they're known for. And they're used widely in IT. They had a compromise. They were able to infiltrate the basically software development cycle. And they did the one thing that could be the worst thing for any companies developing software, is that they were able to sign, meaning they were able to sign pieces of software as being original from the developer. Because when you make something, usually sign it saying, Ben made it, SolarWinds made it, Blumira made it, Entara made it. And all the clients downloaded it and started working with it. So we're still, because that was the starting point, if you look today, there's already some other exploits related to the SolarWinds product, not with the Solar Blast, the one that's well known. But here's the short of it. First, do you have any SolarWinds product? Yes, they say SolarWinds Orion, this product is all in compromise. But if you look at the list, it says basically, we do not believe these other products are compromised. Listen, if they're in the environment and they're putting in pieces of software in their DLLs and they're doing these things, personally, if you have anything from SolarWinds, like, you should be on high alert. I don't care if it's the TF, the little utilities that they give you for free. I would look at that, look in your environment, and kind of use the guidance that they give. Second, and this is most people actually that I've talked to surprisingly haven't been really that much affected by the SolarWinds. Talk to your partners. Do you have a CRM solution, an ERP system that you run? Talk to your vendors, make a list in Excel, go to them and ask them. Half of them have no idea right now. Do not take the word of your account rep. Talk to somebody who's responsible for security there. Figure out if they're affected by it. This.
Like Microsoft? Sorry.
Besides Microsoft.
No, I'm joking. I'm being tongue in cheek, but I do think, managed service providers are an example where commonly used. That could be telcos. It could be anywhere downstream.
It's anybody. Yeah. At this point, with this product, it's really anybody. So make a list and really reach out and find out. Right now, we're just now hearing back from some vendors. Some of them have no idea if they were using it at some point or are using the product.
Yeah, it's tough. I think that's a tough place to be. You got to analyze the risk for your organization, your business, right? On what the potential impact could be, to make sure that you're doing the right things. It's a tough. I think this is a tough one in that this isn't something that we've come across before at this scale. I think it is reflective of this isn't going to be the first time we see it. And I've always had my theories of I think that we have the potential to see things that are much more impactful than this event as well. I think the reality is it hasn't stopped anybody from doing business or shut anything down. It's just the unknown of what's to come from it. So, what other areas should people be looking at as far as their environment, ensuring they have the right controls in place, right? I think there are some low-hanging things like two-factor authentication. We talked about Active Directory and doing some things from a hygiene perspective with different free tool sets. Any other recommendations you have?
Segmentation. And I can talk to a little bit. It used to be extremely difficult to do, to be frank. And I remember the days, when people used to do it manually. It wasn't very effective. Never really stopped anything in most cases. Segmentation can be a low-hanging fruit. It depends on your organization. In some areas, when you start getting into servers, it gets a little bit more complex.
Hey, I do have a question on the segmentation side,
Sure.
right? Because I think like people on this call might not know, hey, what tools are actually make it easier, useful? And I think like a lot of people are like network segmentation. Oh, I got to go create a bunch of VLANs and build a
Yes.
bunch of manual tunnels on my switches and my firewalls and like the reality is like no nobody does that or gets to it because of the complexity. And so I'm curious, like what product sets you've seen that solve that problem well.
So we, full disclosure, we are a partner with a segmentation company, and we do a lot of work post ransomware to bring segmentation very rapidly. In fact, one of the things we've been doing that's been really successful for us is a lot of time when you have like the investigation going on, you can't fully bring, when you want to start recovering as fast as possible, you can't really start bringing things online until you know that you've eradicated the attacker in the environment. So one of the things we've been doing is using segmentation, and I'll tell the exact tools to segment like what we're bringing up while the environment is still, dirty, so to speak. So there are a couple products, I'll list them. Illumio is one, Guardicore, Cisco Tetration, VMware NSXT. Personally, I use Guardicore. I'll make it short and simple. If you're technical, you don't need to change your IPs. You don't need to change your subnets. You don't need to change your VLANs. You don't need to reconfigure your firewalls. You don't need to do anything with the underlying network with these kind of solutions to achieve segmentation. The way they work is, think of it as in a very effective and safe way. You can control the firewall on every system down to the process, down to the command line. And you can write rules based on that by labeling things. So you could write a rule that says something like, my document management system can only have endpoints talk to it, or endpoints can't talk to endpoints, like very simplistic things.
Yep.
And that's kind of been, there's no free-ish tool that exists for it, but I recommend check out Guardicore or come talk to me about it. I'll even show you what it looks like. We've been super successful with it, and it's to the point where it's mature enough to where it's not a burden anymore. And you can get it up and running like in weeks, which is crazy. It used to be years worth of projects.
Yeah.
Similar to maybe how Blumira deploys very quickly without spending so much time tuning. I'm not trying to I'm being realistic. Like I've seen the product and used it. Like if you compare it to an Exabeam or a Splunk, you'd spend an entire dedicated team getting it set up the right way. And it still wouldn't be probably.
No, and I think that's key is it's like, a lot of organizations, especially if you scale down resources and people, you look at somewhere like manufacturing and I know organizations that have 5,000 employees in manufacturing and they have 1 or 2 people dedicated towards security, right? It's just not reasonable for them to take a bunch of switches and routers and segment them properly to the point that they need to be. So products need to be easy and accessible and usable in order to get deployed and get to value. So I think some of the things on the attack side, right? The external exposure, RDP, SMB, password spraying, brute force, tie back most of the time a VPN to Active Directory. The directory side and the credentials being stolen definitely are common areas of people getting into environment. And then once in, then starting to move laterally. And that's, that is the area. I'll hop in a sec just to show a few things on the product side with Blumira, but that's a big area in which we help customers, which is getting early indications of detection so you can stop someone before it becomes a full-on breach.
Yeah, you have to call us to come investigate and rebuild.
Yeah. You don't want to have to call Ben. No. Business seems to be good though. I think that's the reality of security right now, and I think it's an interesting time too, where there's a balance of, hey, what can organizations actually do and get in place to mitigate against kind of the acceleration of what I would consider to be like low-hanging fruit incidences, target attacks. And my theory too is all these people throughout the world at home more people are playing around with tools, and there's a better understanding that like there's stuff out there you can go and do to make money that's not legal, and not necessarily a kind thing to do, but when you're bored and you're stuck at home, it's probably for some people a thrill to do it as well, is my assumption.
And it's not that well known. There are like really small ransomware run operations where it's just one person. He just picks his target, you know what I mean, and gets Bitcoin. And that's his day job. Does it by himself. And it's, even if he works at it for 6 months, lands $500,000 like ransomware, even $50,000 ransomware, it's worth it.
What's your opinion of the future of cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin?
Oh, it's here to stay. It's here to stay. I think it's going to crash again and then go up even further than it did before.
Yeah. I've kind of found it funny. Like a lot of my friends and family reach out to me like, should I be buying Bitcoin? And it's like, dude, it's at an all-time high.
Yeah, not right now.
That's like, yeah, it's like you should listen when it's like when everyone says, I always say the news articles, when everyone says Bitcoin's dead, that's when you want to buy. And then when everyone gets really excited about it in the hype, then that's when you want to sell.
I think banks are buying it. They're literally buying it.
I think it'll be interesting to see. I think it's going to start maturing a little bit more. But I'm still like, hey, I know all these banks are buying and some people are doing this stuff, but like it's really high risk. And I think people don't acknowledge like there's pretty big risk in the way that it can get stolen and the volatility of it, all these different things. But yeah, I think it shows too there is value in it in regards to like how quick you can transact, the amount of money you can transact at a low cost. There's value in different areas, which I think is exactly the reason why it's been so effective in ransomware is, now I can actually leverage and use something that doesn't require me to be in person, or even maintain an anonymity. I can never say that word right. Anonymity. You know what I'm saying?
Immutability?
No.
Being anonymous. Being anonymous. Okay.
Like there's a lot of those benefits. So do you guys ever see people advising organizations to hold Bitcoin for an event of ransomware that's so serious they need it?
No, we have not run into that where to hold.
Okay. And do you ever see organizations that do?
No, most of them don't even know what Bitcoin is until the ransomware frankly happened. Yeah, they hear about it and they're like, Bitcoin, what's this? Yeah. Can we trace it? We're paying them. Why can't we trace them? Kind of, that's usually the thought process.
For me, it's been a while. Like I got a few calls in 2017 of people asking me for Bitcoin to pay for ransoms, and I was like, I don't want anything to do with this.
I have a funny article I got to send to you. When Bitcoin was very early on, people were mining it like off their laptops and like actually like getting like it was like worth like less than pennies back then. So there's an article about this guy who realized he had 100, and this is during the height of Bitcoin, like 2 years ago. He had 120 Bitcoins, which is that's like almost $1 million or something like that or more, on his laptop in a wallet. And he basically offered anybody like half the coins if they can get it. He couldn't remember what the password to his wallet is, and he spent months. They could never get into it. And I'll send it to you. It's very funny.
No, these are real things. Someone did ask a question, which I think is fair. Do you think there's a market for crypto coin holder as part of an IR process for companies to pay the ransom if they choose? Man, I think legislation keeps on getting stronger here. Where like you're there's a lot of risk in doing something like that. But there's plenty of exchanges that you can go and buy crypto from same day as well nowadays. So I think there's not really as much of a need for that.
It's an interesting business idea, but I don't, like you said, there's so many places to get conversions, holding company, and the problem goes back to I'm not saying this is going to happen, but it's happening in a lot of other places that it's illegal to pay these ransomwares. It would make sense to make it illegal, even though it could like destroy a company basically. But it makes sense to try to stop it from happening.
Well, yeah, if it's illegal and everybody stops paying, then like people are gonna start not running these attacks anymore. Like, is more likely what's to happen. But yeah, it would take some time and introduce some real risks. So, hey, just hopping over before we go, I just want to hop in and show a few things on the Blumira side, tied to some of the things that we're talking about, which is early detection, to prevent incidences and breaches from occurring. A few, just examples. A lot of times what we see is, and I've had many organizations not, even prior to coming to Blumira, kind of talk about the type of attacks in the scenarios of what's happening. On the ransomware side, right? Remote access via VPN. Certainly you should have two-factor authentication enabled. But even early detection of like detecting things like password spraying to see that there's different types of attacks going on. And a lot of times people don't have two-factor configured right or in the right places would be an example. In getting the first part of the credential is half the equation of compromising two-factor. So in this instance, we're doing things like detecting password spraying on the AnyConnect VPN and having the ability to block that attack via IP addresses. And we can actually take a step further and automate it. But that's one common avenue from a remote perspective when you're talking about recon to then getting into an environment. And then some of the other things too common I kind of mentioned earlier are things like detecting risk of, hey, there's an IP address connecting via RDP from the internet, right? This is a good sign, and you can get this information out of things like Windows logs to be able to surface real risk within an environment and take that offline. It's kind of interesting. Most of the time what people say, they're like, oh yeah, I remember I put that on the internet like 2 years ago and I just forgot to take it back down. Are some of the things I've had people say, and that's more or less the reality is that's a lot of how misconfigurations happen as well. And then I think as you get later into the attack, once someone's in a customer's environment, being able to detect things like Mimikatz, for instance, Blue Keep, I think it is, and other types of exploits that are used. And then later in the stage of attack is like account administration or account admins in Active Directory being spun up is a pretty sure sign, when there's ones being spun up that you're not aware of, that show that someone's probably about to deploy ransomware is some of the good indicators when we're talking about Blumira to prevent incident or breach along the way. There's quite a bit of other stuff too, but I figured I'd at least kind of highlight some of these easy to understand and use. Yep.
Most people don't see this.
No, the reality is like in time and time again, right? Is people are surprised, and the reason they're surprised is because they might even have a SIM, but they're not actually monitoring for the common techniques and tactics that people are using. And a lot of that has to do with like the amount of work that goes in, kind of like you mentioned on the network segmentation side. And so we've essentially been able to get the time to get all that stuff ingested, parsed, deployed, and surface real threats down to a matter of minutes to hours from a customer perspective, which is great. Makes it simple and easy. So it looks like we have about 5 more minutes. So if anybody on the call has questions for Ben, anything else you want to add from things people should be considering when and I think that maybe the last thing is like, hey, how should people actually react when they do realize that they have an event or a breach or an incident? How more or less should they handle that?
Don't be afraid to turn off your production environment in your company if you have a ransomware spread. We really see three types of companies. One, they didn't want to take down that one server that's running, this really critical business app, and it gets up again ransomware, and it's a whole thing. Two, they react correctly. They don't be afraid to power things down and wait. It's the damage sometimes from recovery could take a lot longer than you just powering down and being out of business for a day. And the third, on the complete other side of the spectrum, don't nuke yourself. We've seen this a few times where people will start not just turning things down, but completely like unconfiguring their network maybe to try to disconnect, potentially like maybe ripping out cables and breaking your switches and stuff like that. Don't do that. In the end of the day, then the recovery for you will take longer. Be in the middle. Just start turning off things, but don't be afraid to do it. You have ransomware, don't wait. Power it off. Yeah, you're gonna have an IR firm come in and they're gonna kind of guide you for the next steps of what you need to do.
Hey, so do organizations typically call you guys direct? I know you like insurance is one route that you get routed, but is it typical for someone to call your organization to ask for help?
For us, it's all through an IR partner, another IR partner, usually. Other places, it's all insurance. Some smaller shops are direct, but these days, probably 80% of it goes through insurance carriers or counsel as the source.
Cool. We got a question. What about my personal security on my phone, such as Venmo, Cash App? If we have a company hack fan, can those be compromised as well? A little bit off topic, but I would say enable passcode, enable the best controls you have to limit your risk, even on your email as well. Enable two-factor is going to be the best way to probably prevent getting money stolen personally from Venmo and Cash App stuff.
Yeah, and it's unlikely on your phone that a breach of your company would go, spread to your cellular device. I'm not saying it's not impossible, but it's very, 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 very unlikely.
Yeah.
Especially
One thing on the Duo, one thing on Duo that was great was the fact that we actually we had a capability of posture a personal device because the two-factor was on it.